Hey guys, tonight we journey into a space where outcomes are shaped not by chance, but by cold figures. You find your start in the core of Victorian society, a middle-class existence marked by simple prestige, tidy footwear and music lessons on the Sabbath. You're not wealthy, yet you have enough comfort that marriage is simply assumed. Of course, that is the expectation. But this evening, reality deviates from the script. You are counted among a generation burdened by too many single women and a shortage of suitable gentlemen. As time passes, with stiff corsets pushing against your ribs and fine gloves becoming faded in your cabinet, you start to grasp that a wedding may be unrealistic. This is not due to any personal failing or lack of grace, but because there are simply not enough men remaining. Before we get comfortable, please press the like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And if you're joining us from anywhere across the globe this evening, share your location and your local time below. We enjoy seeing where our quiet history fans are listening from. Dim the lamps, turn on a fan for some subtle sound, and let us relax into this evening's small story. It starts gently. You are 16 when the initial murmurs appear in the papers, simple counts of the casualties in Crimea. You do not fully grasp the weight of it at first. Battles appear distant and noble, like fine art or lengthy poetry. But then your relative Ellen's intended husband is listed as lost, and your music instructor suddenly wears only black. By the time you are 20, the fighting is finished. But a subtle consequence remains. An invisible alteration you cannot name. Your mother has begun to look worried more frequently when you leave her sight. Invitations to social events still arrive, but fewer than before. And the men attending these functions are older, limping or strangely silent. You dance regardless, shoes tight, face warm, every expression a silent hope that you might still be chosen. You are not. It is not just you, naturally. Your companion Sarah is also still unmarried, and Louisa and Harriet, who now instructs children in church school with a straight back and forced cheerfulness. The parlours are filled with young ladies who once laughed behind their fans and now speak in measured tones about charity work and divine intention. Society will not call you deserted. That would be improper. You are simply unattached, living at home, devoted to your family. But there is a growing realization, like a hidden thorn. You interpret the unspoken parts of your aunt's remarks, such a pity, with your complexion. Your father sighs when the mail arrives without a suitor's card. You hear a nearby woman mutter about excess women at the market and you feel yourself shrink. What they are avoiding to say, but what you are starting to understand, is that there are more than 500,000 more women than men in the country. 500,000 narratives mirroring your own. 500,000 women who, despite their kindness, intelligence, or beauty, have been outnumbered by circumstance. You start to feel like an error in someone else's plan. The newspapers do not help. One well-intentioned article in the Times suggests that single women should relocate to the colonies where men are plentiful and wives are sought. It is presented as an opportunity, but you read the real meaning. Go away. Do not interrupt the social order. Go be useful somewhere else. And you question, lying awake at night in your flowered bedroom, if that is your only path. Because remaining here, staying, means figuring out how to be unnoticed in plain sight. You will not be the central figure of a romance. You will not host parties in your own house. You will not have children. You will not even be consulted. You will be expected to tolerate quietly, gracefully. But not yet. Not without resistance. You try to tell yourself it is not so bad in the end. There are worse outcomes than sleeping in your own girlhood bed, than hearing the familiar sound of silverware on the morning tea tray, than seeing the flowers bloom on the same wall every spring. You learn to find comfort in consistency because you must, but something within you starts to harden. You begin to notice what is absent from conversations. When your married relatives gather, you are no longer included in talk about having babies or household staff. You wait near the buffet, refilling cups you were not asked to pour, smiling at children you will never have. trying not to appear too available or too forgotten. It is a strange balancing act, one you perform without recognition. You overhear your younger sibling explaining to a guest that we have kept Mary at home as if you were a family heirloom, too delicate to share, kept. At church you feel it too. The clergyman's gaze doesn't rest on you the way it used to. In the seats, families sit like finished puzzles, while you are an extra piece with nowhere to fit. You help manage the flower schedule and teach Sunday lessons to young girls whose mothers whisper that you are such a wonderful influence. You begin to dislike how they say it, like good means harmless. One day your mother raises the subject of employment. Not a career, naturally, never that, but perhaps teaching the piano or serving as a companion to an aging relative just until circumstances change. But they never do. So you smooth your gloves, pack a travel bag, and enter a world of other women like you. Women whose identities are preserved only in embroidered samplers and old religious books. You join them with quiet composure and a slow growing resentment that surprises you. It is not the lack of marriage that hurts. It is the belief that your existence is somehow incomplete for missing it. What they fail to see is that you have become keenly observant in a way others are not. You watch everything. You remember everything. You have created an inner reality as complex and detailed as any financial register. And even though society will not accept it, you are a product of its own calculations, a living leftover, a social problem that could not be solved. You are not just one unmarried woman, you are one of many. In the 1851 census alone, over 400,000 women between the ages of 25 and 35 were listed as single. The totals only increased with time. You reflect on that sometimes as you look out the window of your small upstairs room, your spinster sanctuary, as Sarah jokingly calls it. With a wink, you picture all the other women in their own sanctuaries all across the country, looking through sheer curtains at the same fading light, living similar lives. It is strangely comforting to know you are not alone. You even start to list their names, a roster of single women from the congregation, from old classmates, from letters and memories and newspaper reports. You create a map in your mind, a network of quiet lives, and sometimes you wonder what would happen if you all gathered, if every extra woman in the nation stood up at once. You suspect the ground might shift a little. You are awakened by the sound of the clock below striking 7. It is not your home, but your brother's now. He is married, naturally, has 2 children already. Adorable, loud, always sticky. You have been assigned the guest room, which is a nice way of saying the narrow one in the back, with the angled roof and the slight odour of mothballs. You sit up and put your feet carefully on the floor, covering your sister-in-law selected. It is flowered. Everything she chooses is flowered. You used to imagine what your own space would look like. Dark wood cabinets, perhaps, a deep green sitting room, quiet reading. But that version of you existed in a different past. Now you find yourself a resident in a house that once would have been your responsibility. You thank your hosts for the drinks they do not forget, laugh at the children's games and keep out of the way. That last part is the most critical. It is strange being here. You grew up alongside this man, your brother. You used to secretly share sweets and raceboats down the creek. Now he is the head of the house, the authority figure, while you are the addition, a silhouette attached to the family structure. And then there is her. Your sister-in-law is pleasant enough, polite, but you both understand the silent agreement in place. She tolerates you and, in return, you minimize yourself. You speak softly, you do not interfere, and you certainly do not argue with her views in front of visitors. Once you reached for the tea container to pour, and she gently guided your hand away with a smile that conveyed not yours. You smiled back, accepting your position. Your place in the household is a tightrope, fragile, unwanted, fraying. You assist where possible, fixing clothing, folding sheets, cleaning the silverware for Sunday. You tell yourself these are thoughtful acts, not desperate attempts to justify your presence. And yet every stitch feels like a confession, I have no dwelling of my own, no space but the one I borrow. There is a deep sadness in that. Not shame, just quiet self-consciousness, the type that accumulates like dust in corners. Sometimes on calm evenings you hear them speaking in the main room. After the children are asleep, you sit upstairs, still, book open in your lap. The discussion drifts up through the floor. Your name, the phrase dependent, your prospects. You hear the pause, you recognise the tone. Sympathy disguised as courtesy. You learn to move lightly, to leave no impression in the hall, to make your world smaller so theirs can feel full. It is a specific kind of fading, executed slowly. But here is what they overlook. While they focus on household accounts and social invitations you are observing, you have become something like an object, present, stationary, ignored. And in that invisibility, you notice everything. The flirtation between the cleric and the lonely woman across the street, the servant's hidden treats, the neighbour's strange cough and its monthly rhythm. There is strength in being the unobserved one, a witness to a world that believes you no longer matter. One of the newspapers labels women like you unnecessary. A harsh word, an excess of decoration, of numbers, of lives with no dowry and too much memory. But you know better. Unnecessary does not mean without value. It means surviving. And you are still here. You start to wonder how many other spare rooms across the country are filled by women just like you, silent guests in homes that once promised something greater. You picture them sitting on beds too small for comfort, writing letters never sent, listening through walls that are not theirs. A sister here, a cousin there, an aunt settled into a chair no one actually uses. The spare room becomes a domain in itself, a domain of patterned walls, wash basins, well-worn books, and quiet. You learn to walk without making noise on the floorboards. You plan your arrival for tea so you do not come too soon, or worse, too late. You perfect the skill of being visible without being noticed, helpful without intervening, ready without asking. And yet, some mornings, you catch your own reflection in the mirror and hardly recognise her. The face is yours, but the expression is new. It carries the weight of being gently removed. When family acquaintances visit, they inquire about your well-being, your health, not your opinions, your goals, your pleasures. You wonder when you became a subject of concern, not conversation. And naturally, there is always one who leans in too closely and whispers, "But you were so beautiful in your youth," as if beauty had been a vehicle you failed to catch, as if the destination was now closed. You smile politely because there is no handbook for this chapter of life. There are no books where the single older sibling is the protagonist. Jane Austen gave you clever, attractive women who found partners by the final pages. You finished the final chapter long ago. Still, you try to build something for yourself. You send correspondence to old school friends. Some reply, some do not. You suggest outings, afternoon tea, church events, anything to remind yourself that you exist outside these walls, that you are more than folded clothes and borrowed space. And when that fails, you withdraw inward. Your thoughts become your secret defiance. You invent complete discussions in your head. What you would say if you were mistress of the house, what you would do if the cleric ever showed interest in you. You imagine saying no just to experience the satisfaction of having a choice. You imagine a life where you never had to wait for someone else's approval to matter. One evening, as you help your niece with her sewing, she looks up and asks, "Did you ever wish to be married, Auntie?" The question is sincere, hurtful in its directness. You hesitate just long enough for her to observe, and then you laugh, a small practiced sound. Once you say, "But then I became quite good at other things." She nods and the moment is over. But later that night you record it in your personal diary. Quite good at other things. You emphasize it twice because that is the reality of it. In this spare room, you have mastered patience, observation, self-reliance. You have become a silent chronicler of the life surrounding you. You know where the weaknesses in the family's image are. You remember birthdays no one else does. You absorb moods like a sponge, then soothe the environment with a careful remark or a fresh arrangement of flowers. You are not without purpose. You are just not noticed. There is a distinction. You sit upright on a wooden seat, lace collar perfectly flat, and smile with the gentle pleasantness expected of a woman who has long since set aside girlish dreams. Across from you, your mother pours tea for the clergyman's spouse, who has visited without warning just for a talk. But everyone knows this is more than just a talk. It is a careful examination. "How delightful to see you still at home," the clergyman's wife says, eyes checking your hands for a wedding band that will never appear. Such a blessing to your dear mother. So many young women these days are rushing off to who knows what. She pats your arm. You resist the urge to pull away. You thank her with a smile so effortless, so well practiced, it could be framed and displayed above the mantelpiece. This is your life now, an endless series of teas, visits, and guarded exchanges where your worth is judged not by accomplishments but by obedience. You are poised not for what you achieve, but for how successfully you have managed to not cause any trouble. You are expected to be gracious, unassuming, uncomplaining. You are the daughter who did not defy, the sister who did not run away, the woman who did not make a scene. You wear your disappointment like delicate trim, decorative, subtle, stitched onto your behaviour with unseen thread. It is not that anyone is deliberately unkind. On the contrary, the world is deeply, annoyingly civil. They ask how your activities are progressing, meaning the Sunday school readings or the lace trim you are hand-stitching for the church altar. They comment on your cleverness, your sound judgment, your dependability in a crisis. But the room always quiets when you speak too passionately, when your voice rises just enough to show you are still thinking, still desiring, still full of that powerful energy that the world seems determined to extinguish with pleasantries and weak tea. Your married sister once mentioned to you, while arranging the sitting room flowers, that she sometimes wished she had your independence. You did not reply, not because you were annoyed, but because you suddenly could not find the words for what your independence actually felt like. Because here is the fact. It is not independence. It is a role. You are expected to perform goodness, submission, quiet, devotion. You are expected to occupy minimal area and speak in soft tones and know instinctively when your presence is no longer needed in the room. Even affection, if it were to appear, must do so through the accepted routes. No surprises, no passion, no improper longing. It must be respectable and unlikely. In private, when you are alone, you engage in small acts of defiance. You write thoughts in the blank spaces of books. You laugh a bit too loudly at a joke the cleric would not approve of. You wear your hair down just for a short time and imagine what it might feel like to have someone else's hand smooth it behind your ear. These are tiny actions, minor protests, but they are your own. The world of your family is not cruel, but it is suffocating in its demands. You are a female-shaped likeness positioned precisely in the gallery of others' pride, spotless, proper, silent. And sometimes you wonder what would happen if you stood up during tea and declared something outrageous that you wanted to paint or explore or shout. You do not, but you imagine it. Often. Later that week, during a customary walk with your mother through the town, a neighbour stops you near the vegetable stand. She is all feathers and strong views, her hat slightly tilted, her voice just a bit too loud. "You know," she says brightly, as if announcing happy news, "there is a man in Bath, a widower, with a decent income and only 3 children. No trouble at all, truly. He is looking for someone dependable." You blink, once, twice. Your mother gives a nervous chuckle, the kind that attempts to bridge offence and politeness, but you remain silent. You simply nod and move on, fresh vegetables held under your arm like a shield. This is the constant routine. The attempts at matching you with someone continue long after hope has vanished. Not because anyone genuinely thinks it will happen, but because suggesting it keeps you in a bearable category. A not yet single, a possibility, a file still open. To state clearly that you will not marry is too awkward for them. Not for you. Back at home, your mother offers you a glance across the drawing room that is both apologetic and expectant. You keep busy with your embroidery frame, small stitches, quiet anger. You recall when you once loved this design, small purple flowers climbing a vine. Now it is simply something to prevent your hands from shaking. That night, you sit at your small desk by the light of a candle, rereading a letter from a friend who lives alone in a house outside Oxford. She never married either, teaches art to girls, keeps livestock. Her writing is energetic and sloping and full of spirit. She wrote, "There is more than one way to live as a woman. I only wish society would permit us to say so openly." You trace those words with your finger like a promise. You wish you could say them openly too, but here in this house, womanhood is still determined by marriage or its absence. Your value is spoken of in hushed tones, your respect must be performed, not claimed, and so you return to the main room. You help your mother arrange the tea service. You compliment the neighbour's fruit preserves. You nod politely when someone mentions the Bath widower again, as if he were a valuable prize and not a final resort. But inside, you are planning something. You begin reading newspapers for more than just the wedding announcements. You notice the names of women writing opinion pieces, lectures being given, societies being established, discussions about financial rights and progress. Something is shifting, however subtly, in your mind. A possibility begins to appear. Not loudly, not suddenly, but steadily, quietly, like a lock slowly giving way after years of being jammed. You still cannot express your thoughts at the dinner table. You still stitch purple flowers. You still nod and smile and avoid confrontation. But in the secrecy of your mind, you start drafting something. A message, a letter, a concept. Perhaps you will not marry. Perhaps you were never meant to. But that does not mean you have nothing to express. It only means you have had more time to consider how to express it. You stand by the window of the public library, gloved, hands together, pretending to look at an old book of plant illustrations. But actually, you are listening. Two women near the counter are speaking in low voices about someone you both know. Miss Adelaide Finch. She has never been courted, not even once, one says. And she is almost 40, poor soul. The other whispers as if Miss Finch had suffered a loss. You feel your jaw tighten. You have known Miss Finch for years. She manages the reading group at St. John's, can recite long sections of a great poet by memory, and once organised a protest against the railway's extension near the town water feature. And yet none of that matters. She is single, therefore she is unfortunate. You are reminded again that in the eyes of society, an unmarried woman is not allowed to be interesting. She may be respected, but only if she is quiet, neat. A background feature. The covering, never the view. You are becoming that presence. When you enter a room, the atmosphere changes just slightly. Men offer brief, tight-lipped acknowledgements. Younger women smile with a little too much compassion. Conversations never entirely stop when you arrive, but they change like the water around a fixed stone. You used to think this would improve with age, that perhaps by 35 or 40 you would command more respect, that your views might finally be taken seriously. But in reality, your unmarried status stays with you like a scent. Noticeable, constant, impossible to ignore. You have heard all the terms by now. Young woman, lady, gentlewoman of limited means, old maid. The labels are delicate weapons meant to wound without leaving marks. The world does not yell its disapproval, it whispers it with small cloths and flowered paper, and so kind to remain home with her mother. And yet, strangely, there is a kind of liberty in this isolation, the liberty of low expectations. No one asks when you will marry anymore. That painful question has matured into an assumption. Instead, they ask if you will help with the harvest festival, or arrange hymn books, or sit with Great Aunt Martha on certain days. You do, naturally. It is the expectation. But sometimes, as you walk through the town square or along the path by the bushes, you wonder what would happen if you simply refused. What if you said no? What if, instead of arranging flowers for the church steps, you boarded a train and travelled to the city? Or visited your friend in Oxford with the livestock and the passionate writing? What if you let your hair grow long again? What if you stopped minimising yourself? You do not act on these urges, not yet, but you cherish them like valuable secrets. Still, you perform your part, because society is watching, and society has very specific ideas about how women like you should behave. You should be helpful, humble, quietly appreciative. You should speak of your relatives' children as your rewards and mention your unmarried state with jokes before anyone else can. But inside you begin to feel something developing, a small resistance planted deep and nourished by years of minor insults and suppressed humour. And sometimes, just sometimes, when someone calls you poor dear, you imagine dropping the tea tray onto the table and yelling, "I am not poor, I am not damaged, I am simply not yours." You never do, of course, but oh, you imagine it so clearly. You try to remind yourself that it is not only about you, that the quiet confinement you find yourself in was constructed slowly over many years. Even the most elegant parlours are built on unspoken rules about who speaks, who listens, and who simply exists without question. You observe it at every social event. Married women speak openly of household issues, their children's ailments, their husband's work. Widows are treated with a certain respect, dressed in black, but at least possessing experience. Even the very young are allowed space to fantasize openly of weddings and courtships yet to happen. But you are the break between topics, the polite silence, the woman people refer to indirectly when they want to make a point about maturing gracefully or learning to find meaning in simpler pursuits. At a gathering last Sunday, a younger woman asked you, quite sweetly, whether you ever regret not marrying. You were holding a glass of fruit drink and watching a child chase a flying insect across the grass. I suppose everyone regrets something you said because it was the most honest reply you could give without inviting further examination. But afterward you replayed the moment repeatedly in your mind, not because of what she said, but because of what you kept silent. You could have told her that regret is not the same as being incomplete, that you have discovered fulfillment in areas she has not yet considered looking, in friendships that lasted longer than romance, in solitude that refined your mind like a sharpening tool. You could have told her that there is strength in choosing to live a life outside the predicted path. But society does not want to hear that. It prefers your silence edged with lace. And so when women like you begin to speak, truly speak, it surprises people. Not because your thoughts are extreme, but because they were never meant to be heard at all. Consider Miss Talbot, for example. She resides in the town, 3 streets away. Single, 63, runs the local charitable organisation with great precision. She once wrote a letter to the newspaper about the poor condition of the roads and signed it, "A Spinster with a Backbone." The letter caused a small commotion in the town hall and a large one in the vicar's residence. You baked her biscuits that week. Society still has not quite forgiven her, but you have. In fact, you admire her. She declines to apologise for existing, for being noticeable, for having a backbone. And that is the quiet truth that nobody states openly. Being single is not shameful. Being visible is. To be unmarried without an explanation or apology is to challenge the expected story. You are supposed to be sad, or strange, or old-fashioned, not competent, not inquisitive, not whole. But you are whole. You always have been. You just had to stop waiting for someone else to confirm it. And as you hang up your shawl that evening and prepare for another dinner where your voice may or may not be heard, you decide that next time you will say just a little more. Not all of it is apparent yet, but there is enough presence to confirm to the people in the room that you are not merely a background figure, not a warning sign, and certainly not a leftover. You are a woman who is continually evolving. Your steps on the stone stairway make a soft sound as you approach the entrance of the schoolhouse. The morning air is moist, the characteristic English dampness that penetrates your gloves and settles into your joints long before the clock indicates 10. You draw your woolen wrap more closely around yourself and deliberately push the door latch. This is your vocation now, instructing the daughters of farmers, merchants and widows in literacy, needlework and simple math. The headmistress addresses you as Miss, always with a hint of pity, as if your solitary status were an ailment one might acquire from too much exposure to ink and numbers. You did not select this existence. It was put forth as the only respectable option for a lady of your class who had passed a certain age without obtaining a spouse. No inheritance, no marriage proposal, no alternative route available. Thus, you are here, inhaling the scent of chalk dust and drying inkwells. The students address you informally, and a few adore you with that fierce, unreserved affection children possess, clinging to your sleeves, offering you crushed petals, imitating your pronunciation in the schoolyard. Others regard you cautiously, perhaps echoing the gossip they overhear at home. Old maid, severe woman, no family. In their youthful imaginations, you become a myth, functional, accessible, but not quite genuine. Still, you discover peace here. There is authority in the aligned desks, in the sound of slates being used, in the rhythm of instruction. You control this environment. You establish the regulations, and for a few hours each day you are not a superfluous woman. You are an essential one. But even this space has its limitations. Your salary provides barely enough to subsist on, even with the small room given to you in the schoolhouse attic. It is perpetually cold, even in the middle of summer, and the washing basin will crack in the winter unless you handle the kettle with care. Your gowns have been repaired so many times that the seams are more thread than cloth. You iron them every night and wear them with pride nonetheless. What you do not spend in currency, you spend in self-respect. At social gatherings, when the pastor's wife introduces you as our devoted school teacher, her smile is a little too strained, as if she is proud of having managed to find a practical purpose for you. You respond graciously. You offer thanks because it is the expectation. Your brother occasionally sends a sealed note, a modest offering for necessities, but you rarely cash it. The mere notion that your continued existence relies on his kindness is intolerable. You would prefer to manage without. You frequently do. At times you encounter women on the streets wearing brighter head coverings, with smoother complexions and softer hands, and you experience, without warning, a sharp pain close to sorrow, not for a lost romantic partner, but for the life path you were never permitted to choose. Yet when a small girl, her chin stained with ink, successfully forms her letters for the very first time and radiates joy as though you were responsible for the stars, the feeling is authentic, something you have earned. And when you return to your attic chamber at twilight and sit by the window, the candle flickering, your journal open on your lap, you remind yourself that this is meaningful work, this is a distinct purpose, and in a world that anticipated your disappearance, you have endured. Each dawn, each lesson, every precise stitch in every repaired hem is a refusal to vanish. A brief, apologetic knock sounds at your door. One Tuesday evening, the kind of knock that precedes an imposition. It is the headmistress, agitated, her face blotchy from the cold. The priest's relative is in need of a companion, she begins, smoothing her skirt. Only for a short time, of course. She is unwell. Well, not precisely ill, just fragile. You understand how temperaments can be. You assent, although you do not. Temperament is a phrase people use when they wish to avoid saying lonely or bored or quietly desolate. She requires someone neat, subtle, skilled with needlework. You are all of these qualities. And so by Friday, you are situated in a calm sitting room on the town's edge, folding linen napkins, and listening to a woman 2 decades your senior retell the same anecdote for the 3rd time that afternoon. You politely nod each time and replenish her tea as if hearing it for the first. This is the essence of being a companion, serving as a comfortable background presence. Not precisely a servant, not quite a friend, not truly. Something in between, a person to bear witness without consuming too much space. You often reflect on how peculiar it is, the multitude of roles unmarried women are required to perform: instructor, assistant, helper, confidant, nurse, escort, aide. Your capacities are utilised, your hours are taken, but your individual identity is often left outside the door. Still, you tolerate it because the alternative is to be perceived as without occupation, and idleness is considered a moral flaw for women like you. You have mastered the art of making yourself inconspicuous, to smile without expectation, to offer without seeking, to exist as a mere utility. But there are fleeting moments when the window is open and the sunshine falls just right upon the floor, covering, and you recall something from years past. A walk near the water, a moment of shared laughter in a corridor, a written note you never dispatched. You keep a collection of those notes, bound with a ribbon, in your travel trunk. Not because you hope someone will eventually read them, but because the act of writing them made you feel genuine. Some are addressed to no particular person. Some are addressed to individuals who never responded. Some are only half composed, abandoned mid-sentence, like a thought you were scared to complete. They constitute your secret history, your record, the sole documentation of a heart that has quietly functioned in the background all this time. One note, folded at the top, begins with, "If I had been allowed to choose." You never conclude the thought. You never did. But sometimes, in the quiet moment between the final cup of tea and the dying embers, you whisper the remainder into the stillness. You imagine what it would be like to wake in a dwelling of your own making, in a life defined by your choices, with no one expecting you to retrieve or calm or fold or conceal. You imagine being acknowledged not for what you contribute, but for who you are. And in those imagined hours just before sleep overtakes you, you reassure yourself that simply surviving is not the same as settling, that even within this confined existence you have carved out pockets of resistance, of endurance, of grace, and that you are not simply what was left behind, you are what perseveres. The first time you see the boarding house, it is raining, that thin, relentless drizzle that penetrates both outerwear and optimism. The area smells of smoke and boiled vegetables. A youth pushes a cart past you, its squeaking wheel marking the rhythm of your approach. You stop before the main entrance and examine the brass marker. Ms. Tremaine's respectable lodgings for ladies of refinement. Respectable. That word again, it follows you everywhere, doesn't it? Like a piece of restrictive clothing holding everything in place, but never permitting you to fully exhale. You pull your coat closer and knock. Miss Tremaine herself is a frail woman with piercing eyes and a powdered face that creases when she offers a faint smile. "Top floor, at the end of the corridor," she states abruptly. "Communal bathroom, no male visitors, meals at 8 and 6 if you require them." Then she is gone like a sudden draught through thin curtains. Your room is scarcely wider than your extended arms. Sloping roof, metal bed frame, a chipped wash basin, and one narrow window that overlooks the rear of another building. The wall covering is peeling in quiet agreement, but it is yours. No nieces interrupting, no mother hovering, no awkward dinner conversation to navigate. Only the rhythmic sound of the clock and the faint creaking of old floorboards. You sit on the bed. It makes a protesting noise under your weight. You smile anyway. The other occupants are a collection of indistinct figures. Ms. Potter, who once managed a musical instrument store. Miss Price, who previously taught handwriting in a distant land, and Miss Hanley, whose history remains obscure, but who always carries the faint aroma of scented oil and distilled spirits. You dine together at large tables using mismatched silverware. You discuss the weather, the sermons given by the local priest, the increasing cost of fuel for lamps. But beneath the polite conversation lies something else, something shared. A brief recognition in the eye when a former romantic interest or a sister's nuptials is mentioned, a mutual glance, a subtle acknowledgement. You all comprehend the identical underlying sorrow. The boarding house is not luxurious, it is not even noticeably warm, but there is a peculiar comfort in being among women who are no longer obligated to belong to anyone, no longer prospective wives, no longer daughters to be disposed of. Simply women existing, persevering, recalled only by records of payment and worn photographs. Some place fresh flowers on their window ledges. Others compose lengthy letters in neat handwriting, sent not to lovers but to distant female relatives or almost forgotten friends. One woman engages in painting, not skillfully, but with enthusiasm. Another practices musical scales on an ill-tuned piano, more out of nostalgia than for actual music. There is occasional laughter, sometimes breathless, sudden, unexpected, over ruined food or a mishap with a hat. You discover yourself laughing as well. The sound feels unfamiliar in your own throat, like something borrowed but deeply appreciated. In the evenings, you read by the light of the lamp, or mend a skirt, or simply sit and listen to the faint clatter of horses' hooves, the soft breathing sounds from the adjacent room, the quiet dripping of rain on the sill. It is not the future you were instructed to anticipate, but it is a life. And in the blank spaces of your notebook you begin to jot down small observations, not notes this time, just simple moments. A feline on the fence, the warmth of soup shared, the quiet dignity of Miss Hanley's silver hair in the sunshine. You record them not to be remembered by others, but to remember yourself. This location, these women, these lives that were never meant to occupy space, but do so regardless. Life at Miss Tremaine's boarding house settles into a routine, a quiet one, built on mutual customs and unspoken understandings. No one knocks loudly. No one enters another woman's room without a clear reason. You learn each other's preferred tea preparations, the specific creaks of every floorboard, the difference between a genuine cough and one that simply conveys, "I am lonely, please come sit near me." You learn how to coexist with women who carry their histories like sealed correspondence. They do not always share. Miss Price composes letters every Thursday at exactly 3 o'clock with dependable regularity. She wears the same faded purple shawl each time and never discloses the recipient. You do not inquire. You merely ensure the kettle is ready when she descends the stairs. Miss Potter, who speaks infrequently, occasionally leaves a baked item by your door on days she observes you lingering slightly too long by the corridor window. There is a form of communication here composed entirely of small acts, of shared presence, of simply not leaving. You become proficient in it. Some nights you find yourself in the shared sitting room with the others, turning the pages of a well-worn book, pretending to read while the lamp flickers and someone hums softly into the darkness. These evenings feel like a protective charm, a fragile type of solace, woven from the fact that all of you, once regarded as failures in the marriage market, have managed to construct something gentle and peculiar and entirely your own. A new resident arrives once, young, flushed, recently discarded from some unsuccessful family arrangement. Her name is Edith. She is sharp-spoken and fragile. Miss Tremaine assigns her the smallest attic room. Initially, she cries behind thin walls. You and the others leave small items by her door, a hair decoration, a warm bread roll wrapped in a cloth, a copy of an old novel. No messages, no explanations. Eventually, she begins to leave her door slightly ajar. That is the way things operate here. You do not demand entry. You simply create the opportunity. It is not glamorous. There are no grand events, no hidden fortunes, no secret declarations of affection, but there is a shared endurance here, a quiet refusal to disappear entirely. You are not wives. You are not mothers. You are not society's celebrated daughters, but you belong to one another. That winter, a persistent cough circulates through the residence, not severe but difficult, the kind of cough that disrupts sleep and shortens conversation. You prepare herbal infusions from dried citrus peel and mint. You apply warm compresses to foreheads. You discover yourself caring for these women with a tenderness that surprises you. Miss Hanley experiences the worst of it. One evening, as you assist her down the steps, she clutches your hand and says with a faint smile, "We should have established our own society, you know. Spinsters United. Our motto, we persist." You smile. But later, alone in your chamber, you quickly write it into the margins of your notebook. We persist. It is more than a slogan. It is a kind of legacy. No grand statues will be erected for women like you, but your lives, your shared amusement, your mending, your warm baked goods left at the door will echo in the places history overlooks. And you decide then that perhaps the goal was never to be publicly celebrated. Perhaps the goal was to endure gracefully. It begins with a small booklet left on the bench at the railway station. You are not strictly supposed to be there. You have simply accompanied Ms. Potter to her relatives, and as you await the returning vehicle, you notice it wedged between a schedule and a piece of forgotten yarn, a thin, modest publication titled in clear lettering, "Temperance and the Working, a Call to Reform." You discreetly place it in your handbag, not because you necessarily agree with its content, but because the knowledge that women are writing, organising, and actively working ignites a small light in your chest. Later that evening, in the flickering lamplight of your room, you read every word twice. The next day you notice a announcement on the church public notice board. Temperance Society meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m, Schoolhouse Hall. Ladies welcome. You go simply to observe. It's not the kind of activity you have previously engaged in, inserting yourself uninvited into a public discussion. But something about the hard seats, the earnest voices, the simple tea served without formality. It feels recognizable, secure. And the women there they are, vibrant in a way you have not witnessed in years. Unmarried, widowed, overworked, disregarded, but brimming with purpose. They speak of husbands affected by drink and broken homes, of how the places selling alcohol consume wages and hope. They cite statistical data and religious verses in the same breath. They engage in debate, respectfully but passionately, and no one asks about their marital status. They ask, "What capacity do you have? What will you contribute in writing? Who can you bring next week?" You sit at the edge holding your notebook, your heart beating quickly. Then someone asks, "And you, miss? You seem intelligent. Will you assist in drafting the petition?" And you hear yourself reply, "Yes," just like that. You stay late duplicating names in neat columns, folding flyers, arranging provisions for the fundraising event intended to support the next meeting. You walk home in the dark without fear, your cheeks flushed with a feeling that is partly hope and largely purpose. The following week, you bring Miss Price. The week after that, Edith. By spring, nearly half the women at Miss Tremaine's are attending some form of gathering. Temperance, educational reform, the local suffrage group, even a lecture on prison conditions that resulted in Miss Hanley quoting philosophy for days. It is more than just social action. It is a reawakening. Society propagates a myth that unmarried women are bitter, dried up and static. But these women are seething, quietly, persistently, and now with causes to attach themselves to, they have discovered a way to channel that intense energy into progress. At first you hesitate to speak. You defer, you take minutes, But eventually, someone asks you to lead a meeting, only temporarily, simply to maintain order. You clear your throat, you survey the room, and then you begin to speak. You speak about the meaning of being useful, yet unseen, about how women like you are told they are fortunate to be independent, and yet that independence offers no secure position, no home to manage, no title, no recognized standing. You speak about how that independence can be transformed into meaningful action if only someone is brave enough to seize it. The women lean in. You realize they required someone to articulate it. And perhaps you did too. You never expected your name to appear in print. It is nothing significant, only a modest line at the bottom of a section. Minutes prepared by Miss, your surname, secretary. But when you hold that folded leaflet in your hands, when you see your words typeset and distributed among the women of your district, something shifts within you. You are no longer merely observing the world, you are actively influencing it. The work is demanding. Not physical exertion, but emotional exposure. You sit in crowded rooms and hear stories that have been trapped in women's throats for years. You draft letters to newspaper editors who never respond. You arrange seats in cold church halls. You carry bundles of petitions through sleet and smoke, and still you persist. You begin to notice with time that people look at you differently when you speak. Now, people pause. When you enter a room, there is a low tone of recognition. That is the one who organised the food supply meeting. Or, she is involved with the women's education campaign. It is not admiration, not precisely, but it is no longer pity either. Your voice, once trained to soothe, to soften, to concede, has developed new edges. You still speak courteously, but now with authority, with conviction. And it is not only you. The boarding house pulses with activity. Miss Potter resumes teaching music to underprivileged children at the chapel. Edith, who once retreated for weeks, is now gathering signatures for a school funding proposal. Even Ms. Hanley reads documents aloud at meetings, her voice cracking, her hand trembling, but reading nonetheless. You have established something, not a family, not a financial fortune, but a connection, a collective of women woven together by mutual loss, shared tenacity, and a profound understanding of what the world ignores. One afternoon, a married woman from the church approaches you after a meeting. She's well-dressed, tightly corseted, her face etched with the constant anxiety of a life lived under a husband's authority. She says, "I wish I had your time, your independence, your voice." You do not immediately reply, because what is there to say? That independence was purchased at the cost of years of silence? That your voice had to be excavated from layers of domestic responsibility, unmet desires, and social isolation? That you did not choose this path, but you have chosen to travel it effectively? Instead, you reply softly, "Thank you." And as she nods and walks away, you let the true answer resonate in your chest, beating strong and slow. I am not merely lucky to be independent. I made myself independent. The successes are minor. A collection gathered, a regulation reviewed, a sermon slightly moderated in tone. But they accumulate. They hold significance. And unlike the marriages you never had or the titles you never acquired, these victories bear your distinct mark. One evening, sitting in your small room with fingers stained with ink, you pause over your journal. You look toward the window where the candlelight flickers against the glass. You think of the person you once were, waiting, hoping, shrinking. You whisper to her, "Observe what we have become," and you smile. The journal is bound in leather, softened at the edges, its spine curved from years of careful handling and late-night confessions. You never truly intended to keep it. Initially, it was random thoughts on pieces of paper tucked away behind candle holders or beneath your pillow. Sentiments too intense or too peculiar to express openly. But now, it is where you exist most genuinely. Each evening after the dinner dishes are cleared and the communal room has quieted, you draw the fabric across the window, ignite your lamp, and open its cover like a door only you are permitted to walk through. You do not write for posterity. You are not expecting to be discovered. You write to remain present, at least to yourself. Tonight you begin. Miss Hanley remarked that the apple pastry reminded her of someone she once shared an embrace with in a distant city. She declined to elaborate. I did not press. Then you hesitate. The tip of the writing instrument scratches lightly against the edge of the paper. You contemplate if you will ever say something similar, if recollection will eventually become more cherished than the actual event. You place the pen down. This is what the world fails to perceive. They categorize you by your labels: unmarried woman, helper, instructor. But they never consider what it means to live with a heart that has no obvious destination. Because it does go places. It is directed toward your companions who now feel more like female relatives. It is poured into every pot of hot beverage brewed for someone upset by a letter of refusal. It invests itself in every letter you compose for a woman too reserved to speak for herself at the local government meeting. It remains in the corridor when you wait outside Edith's door, listening for her breathing to normalise after a spell of anxiety you never articulate. It even finds its way to individuals long gone. You still occasionally think of him, the one you nearly loved. His features are blurred now, more of a vague feeling and sound than a clear image. But his phantom drifts in when you least anticipate it, when a particular musical note is played, when the light catches dust motes in precisely the right manner. You do not exactly grieve for him. You grieve the potential of being understood like that. And yet there is something more profound in these writings than mere romance, something larger than yearning. You write about the coloration of the rain, the way Miss Potter tucks her feet under her chair like a child, the specific ache in your shoulder that only occurs on certain days. You write, too, about frustration, even fury, at the preconceived notions you must endure, the shop assistants who address you casually as if you were a pet, the rental agent who presumes you have nothing better to do than arrange draperies, the family members who still suggest you might find someone suitable if you simply presented yourself slightly more assertively. You document all of it, because if no one else is watching, you are. And some nights, as you close the journal and extinguish the flame, you wonder what would occur if someone were to read it one day. Would they find melancholy? Probably. Isolation, certainly. But also resilience, wit, audacity. A quiet, persistent form of contentment that refuses to diminish simply because the world declined to acknowledge it. You slide the journal beneath your pillow and smile, because even if no one else remembers you, you have remembered yourself. And that, ultimately, may be the most revolutionary act of all. There are pages you never share with anyone, not even Miss Potter, who once confessed the love she lost years ago and wept into your lap for a continuous hour. Not even Edith, who shares every detail. Her anxieties, her past admirer, even the tiny birthmark on her left foot that she insists resembles a distant island. No, some pages remain concealed behind the cover of your journal, secured with a ribbon, pressed flat beneath your pillow like a secret dried flower. They contain the aspects of you the world was never meant to witness, the aspects the world maintained should not even exist. You have written about intense feeling. Not simply the abstract pain of loneliness, but the intense, palpable kind. The kind that once arose in your chest when a certain woman leaned in too closely to adjust your clothing, her breath warm near your face. Or the instance you observed two young women laughing, walking hand in hand down a small passage behind the clothing store, and thought, that could have been me. You do not share these pages, not because you feel embarrassment, but because embarrassment was instilled in you, like proper posture and dining etiquette. Conduct to stand upright, to smile gently, to never, ever want something the world has not granted you permission to name. No one forewarned you that an unmarried life comes with spectres, not only of men you did not marry, but of women you never got the chance to fully cherish. You once read an essay in a little-known pamphlet circulated among the reform group. It referenced intimate friendships between women. Formal, veiled language, but beneath it, a profound truth. Shared living spaces, shared resources, lifelong commitment presented as social conformity. You cut it out and attached it to the back of your journal, not because it exactly mirrored your circumstances, but because it whispered, "You are not alone." The world refuses to ask single women what they experience regarding affection, regarding physical contact, regarding the bodies we navigate through life with no one to claim them. As if without a husband, desire turns to ash, as if lack of sexual experience defines the limits of your emotional capacity. But your emotional capacity has travelled further than they imagine. It has yearned, it has burned intensely, it has become guarded in certain respects and compassionate in others. It has learned to redirect its warmth into close female relationships, into educating, into causes, into mere survival. Yet sometimes, in the quiet before morning, you admit it. You craved more. Not royalty, not even a vow. Simply somebody who'd tuck your scarf tenderly under your jacket, who'd understand your quiet moments, who'd meet your eyes across the dinner table like it anchored something lasting. You never received that, not truly. But you've known love in stolen looks, in clasped hands, in shared teacups, offered gently during grief, in how Mrs. Hanley placed a blossom on your pillow wordlessly after your mama passed. It might not resemble the love in storybooks, but it existed. It exists. You shut your diary carefully. You breathe out. Tonight you'll envision a world, not different from this one, but with permission to voice every thought you've buried. And in that vision, you won't seek approval. You'll just exist. You're positioned in the rear pew, wearing gloves, hands clasped, singing the psalm by heart, though your gaze is vacant and your thoughts are distant. It's Sunday service and the chapel is crowded with the familiar faces, properly dressed households arranged by age, old men dozing through the preaching, youngsters fidgeting under lace caps. The atmosphere carries beeswax, fabric, and the slightest trace of lavender. Like clockwork, you settle beside Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Price. The three of you have occupied the identical spot for ages. Nobody voices it openly, but it's accepted. This bench belongs to the unmarried women. Folks don't use that term to your face these days. Naturally, society has developed into gentler cruelties. Now it's you women, the reserved ones, such dependable ladies. You're a constant, reliable, expected, the sort of individual others assume will perpetually be present and quietly begrudge when you remain. Following the service, as the congregation flows into the courtyard, you sense the recognisable transformation. The minister welcomes the newlyweds with an enthusiastic grin. An infant is praised by a cluster of admiring ladies. Invitations for visits are offered to households, to pairs, to widows with energetic boys. Nobody utters your name. You remain with the rest, beaming, acknowledging, trading courtesies. But you detect it increasingly now that your existence isn't unwanted precisely, but surplus. You're not the initial to be acknowledged, nor the final to be overlooked. You're beside community, not inside it. Home at the lodging house during tea, Mrs. Price shares a tale about a young relative who questioned her if she'd ever experienced love. She laughs over her mug, but you notice the strain in her fingers. "I mentioned once," she responds, "that appeared to content her." It transforms into a pattern. In the coming days, you and the rest discover yourselves exchanging tales not of romances but of companionships, connections so profound they might have been confused for something different, looks maintained too extended, journeys made just the pair of you, correspondence that trembled with unspoken matters, and you start to comprehend something. The society may not have offered you conventional closeness, but you've experienced something different. You recall the occasion Edith burst into the kitchen, enraged after a municipal official dismissed her suggestion at the board gathering. You prepared her tea and remained wordlessly alongside her until her tension eased. Nothing was spoken. Nothing needed to be. Or the dawn Miss Hanley became sick and you, without hesitation, remained by her bedside for 12 hours continuously, cooling her brow and humming familiar melodies. Who else manages that, if not affection? Society never created room for these bonds to be witnessed, much less acknowledged. But that doesn't render them less genuine. It simply means you've constructed them in the stillness, in the transitional spaces, in the overlooked corners of a society that solely appreciates what it comprehends. Days later, a youngster from the academy gestures at you and declares, "You're the women who constantly move together." You grin and acknowledge, "Correct, we exist." She doesn't question where your spouses are. She doesn't question why you never bore offspring. She simply waves and bounces away. And for the initial occasion in considerable time, you feel acknowledged not as something absent, but as something whole. It begins modestly. A borrowed wrap on a breezy night, a knowing look across the supper table when the broth is especially watery, a note left sealed until the proper companion is near you to recite it aloud. These are the instances that bind you together, not with string, but with comprehension. Unmarried life, you've discovered, isn't a lonely verdict. It's a fellowship, unvoiced, frequently invisible, but genuine in every manner. At Miss Tremaine's, the lodging house seems decreasingly like a temporary station and increasingly like a peaceful refuge. A location formed not of barriers and entryways, but of patterns, movements, and tea poured in cracked china. You've constructed something present, not intentionally, not even consciously, but now it remains solid. Every lady in the residence understands the type of hush that comes after your designation isn't mentioned at an event. Each one of you has experienced the manner a space politely contracts around discussions you weren't intended to enter. But present, you communicate freely about governance, about verse, about the expense of heating and the manner the starlight reflects on ice. You share accounts about youth, about sorrow, about the residents whose curtains never appear to part. You giggle in your sleeping clothes, hair loosened without concerning who might observe you and murmur, "Unfortunate soul." There are guidelines naturally, but not the type society created for you. Present, the guidelines remain truthful, remain compassionate, distribute the preserves without being requested. Never allow someone weep isolated unless they desire to. One evening, Miss Hanley reveals something none of you anticipated. A designation spoken softly from long ago. A lady she cherished, not disgracefully, not sorrowfully, simply cherished. A gentle devotion that never possessed a designation anyone else would respect. Nobody reacts shocked. Nobody criticizes. Mrs. Potter extends across the surface and holds her palm. That's everything. You understand then how profound these companionships have developed, how numerous of them are beyond companionships truthfully. They are supports, existences even. Some ladies compose records of conflict or romance or dominion. You consider, privately, that somebody should document this about the ladies who never experienced the ceremony, never displayed the band, but constructed complete universes from what remained. You begin to collect their accounts. Not to release, simply to maintain the evening Mrs. Price stitched the border of Mrs. Potter's garment during a tempest, because it couldn't delay. The afternoon Edith collapsed into sobs when she witnessed purple flowers blooming in the yard and confessed it was her mamma's preferred blossom. The occasion you all remained awake till darkness, reading aloud from a cheap thriller and cackling so intensely the structure trembled. These aren't magnificent narratives, but they're accurate, and in their accuracy they shine. The society will disregard most of them. It perpetually does, but you won't. You record them in your diary, with attention, with designations, with particulars, because this affection, peaceful, lasting, non-passionate but no less powerful, deserves documentation. because you exist not in connection to somebody else's surname, but in the designations you possess and recall and voice aloud around the evening table. Someday somebody will examine those sheets and recognize this is what an existence can resemble. Not showy, not traditional, but complete and absolutely rebelliously sufficient. It's delayed. The lights are dim, the drapes are secured tightly against the darkness, and a solitary flame wavers beside your mattress. You sit in your nightclothes, the chill penetrating through the floorboards into your frame. In your grasp is a correspondence not from relatives, not from a companion. It's from a lady you encountered briefly previous month at a presentation on ladies' learning. Her designation was Margaret, sharp-gazed, steady-spoken, her palms ink-marked from leaflet organising. You conversed for merely 10 moments at the beverage surface, but something transferred between you. A connection, a calmness, a recognition. The correspondence is simple. No announcements, simply sheets filled with considerations. About the presentation, about a fresh volume on transformation, about how peculiar it seems to travel home from an occasion where nobody questioned if she was escorted. At the conclusion, there's an addition. I trust I'm not too bold in stating I discover myself contemplating you, beyond what appears quite suitable, and I trust that doesn't render you uneasy. But I also trust you comprehend. You do comprehend. You comprehend flawlessly. You examine the phrase repeatedly. Then you fold the correspondence deliberately, press it to your torso and recline in mattress, vision open in the shadows. Nobody ever instructed you how to designate this sensation. In narratives, ladies either wed or yearn or perish. They don't reside peacefully in lodging residences and compose cautious correspondence and wonder what might occur if they boarded a train without informing anyone. But in your existence, that's precisely what's developing. The following dawn, you rise promptly. You compose a response. You select every term, like needlework. Calculated, fragile, lasting. You don't state everything. You state adequate. And then you execute something unusual. You depart for a stroll without informing anyone. You wander through the gardens, past damp seating and cawing ravens, until you arrive at the mail receptacle. You insert the correspondence inside. The noise it creates as it descends is modest but conclusive, like a drape ascending. Afterward, home at the residence, you observe around the morning table and comprehend that while affection hasn't come in the manner you were previously instructed to anticipate, it has come regardless. And perpetually it arrived with restrictions. Don't express too extensively, don't desire too openly, don't extend unless extended for. But you're exhausted of restrictions. You recall the ladies you've encountered, the ones who seemed more like kindred spirits than companions. The ones whose proximity comforted you beyond any gentleman's support ever might. You consider the ladies you've embraced in visions but not in sunlight, the ones you documented about but never attempted to designate. And you consider, what if I possessed? What if designating it wasn't incorrect but liberating? Society never provided you the terminology. It solely provided you limitations. But you've started to compose your own expression. It's deliberate, refined, interwoven between mugs of beverage and borrowed parasols and digits touching under surfaces. But it's genuine. You don't require to position on rooftops. You don't require explosions or verses. Occasionally affection is a palm maintained for 3 seconds extended than typical. Occasionally it's a correspondence signed solely yours. And occasionally that is everything. The anticipation is strangely pleasant. You inform nobody about the correspondence. Not Mrs. Potter, not Edith, not even Miss Hanley, who can interpret your temperament superior than your own image. You progress through the week with your typical poise, but underneath your composed exterior, your pulse ticks like a mechanism wound excessively tight. Each occasion the mail comes, your respiration pauses, and each occasion it doesn't deliver a response. You grin as though you weren't anticipating. You've transformed into an expert at concealing tenderness underneath layers of composure. It's a talent unmarried life instructed you excellently. But then, one rainy Tuesday, it comes a modest package. No sender designation, simply your location, inscribed in that identical neat script you recall from the presentation. You transport it upstairs, secure your entrance, and position on the border of your mattress for numerous moments before unsealing it. The correspondence is affectionate, appreciative, cautious still, but less frightened. I was so comforted to obtain your response. I maintain re-examining it, and each occasion I locate a fresh tenderness between your phrases. I seem as though I'm positioned on the boundary of something I never understood I could designate. But now that I possess, I don't desire to retreat. You position a palm on your torso. There it exists, that peculiar pain again, that combination of terror and recognition. It's not a declaration, not yet, but it is an entrance. And you, beyond anyone, recognize the worth of entrances previously considered sealed. Over the weeks that pursue, the exchange continues. Deliberately, affectionately, you exchange considerations on literature, transformation, journeys, household governance. But perpetually just underneath the exterior pulses something different. Yearning, correct, but also comfort that somebody else present witnesses the existence you're experiencing not as a disappointment, but as a manner of liberty, as a legitimate, valuable existence. Eventually, Margaret composes, I would prefer to witness you, not for anything magnificent, simply to position alongside you in the identical space, without correspondence between us. You do witness her. You encounter in a beverage space in Bath, peaceful and private. You converse for periods, cackling at nothing, interrupting each other, consuming broth from the identical utensil. You don't contact, not yet, but you maintain her vision when you state farewell, and in that glance is everything unspoken. When you arrive home, nobody questions your radiance. They wouldn't understand what to request. Following all, unwed ladies are supposed to maintain their devotions safely in the history or in storybooks. But you understand superior now. You understand that longing can be constant, not disgraceful, that closeness can develop in the location between palms resting on the identical surface, that you don't require a wedding document to sense connected to another spirit. Society may not acknowledge what's occurring between you and Margaret. It may not provide it, a designation, a position, or a location at the surface. But you execute, and for now, that's adequate. You record in your diary that evening with a grin you don't attempt to suppress. There are affections that don't display white or conclude in chimes, but they maintain, they endure, and occasionally they arrive precisely in moment. You secure the volume, exhale contentedly, and extinguish the flame. Not a catastrophe, not a disgrace, not a stage. Simply affection. Peaceful, respectable and accurate. The climate transforms colder, your joints pain in the dawns, and the illumination departs the pains earlier each afternoon. Autumn transitions into winter peacefully like an apology, and with it arrives something different, a persistent consciousness. Not terror, precisely, but nearness. You've perpetually understood that being unwed possessed hazards, but now those hazards advance closer. You're no extended the youngest in the lodging residence. Fresh appearances emerge, ladies even older than Miss Hanley, with gentler voices and slimmer frames, who labour to ascend stairs and drift off at supper. They remind you of what's approaching. You detect how rapidly comfort can transform into vulnerability, a solitary sickness, a modification in payment, a forfeited instruction position. These matters don't threaten the wed ladies of the municipality the identical manner. They possess inheritances, residences, household designations to rely on. You possess your pension humble? Your funds moderate, your companions faithful but aging. And so, one rainy dawn, you travel down to the meal kitchen. Not to consume, to assist. The basement carries wet rock and onions. A few iron vessels boil. A nun stirs peacefully while the curious outside assembles. You secure on an apron, fold your sleeves, and commence ladling container after container, peaceful after peaceful. You create vision contact where you manage. You state minimal. You don't require to. Because what you witness in the vision of the ladies who arrive through that queue isn't simply hunger, it's your image. A lady who previously displayed finer footwear. A lady who previously instructed Latin. A lady who previously possessed a chamber like yours. A companion like Edith. A wrap like the one now secured around your own shoulders. And then nothing. Simply a sequence of minimal losses, undetected, unmourned. You never contemplated extensively about the charity institution. It appeared a matter distant from you, reserved for the genuinely destitute, the damaged, the intoxicated, the insane. But it isn't distant, not anymore. You encounter a lady, designated Alice, who used to be a teacher in Kent. She forfeited her position when the offspring matured and possessed nowhere different to travel. She now rests in a charity dormitory and stitches fasteners for pennies. She addresses you sister after the second visit. The term remains with you all evening. Because you are siblings, not by blood, but by circumstance, by the distributed burden of being excess in a society that solely appreciates what it can designate, wed or consume. You arrive back the following week and the week after, not simply to distribute broth, but to observe, to listen, to comprehend the route you might someday travel, and to locate in that nearness to hardship a type of power. You comprehend peacefully that there's a distinction between terror and consciousness. Terror maintains you frozen. Consciousness gets your palms progressing, so you commence to compose correspondence to the chapel board. You assemble a catalogue of former teachers and instructors in the region who might require assistance. You design a humble suggestion. A residence for retired working ladies with communal chambers, humble pensions and no embarrassment. You don't understand if it will succeed, but you do understand this. Nobody different is going to create space for ladies like you. So you'll need to construct the space yourself, brick by brick, container by container, designation by designation. The correspondence you dispatch rarely gain responses. A polite recognition from the parish present, a perfunctory appreciation from a board official there. But you maintain composing regardless, because each occasion you elevate the nib from the sheet, you sense as though you're carving out a minimal location that didn't exist previously. A location with your designation and with the designations of ladies who might otherwise disappear altogether. At the meal kitchen, the appearances transform recognizable. You commence to acknowledge their patterns. The widow who perpetually comes initial, hair groomed neatly as if respect were protection. The former teacher who remains afterward, sharing extended accounts nobody different possesses moment to hear. The youngster, hardly 20, who arrives with her mama, both pretending they're simply present to assist. You discover yourself gazing at them occasionally, not in sympathy, but in recognition. They are simply you at a distinct point on the route. You could so easily exchange positions should fortune transform by simply a few degrees. And that consciousness modifies the manner you progress through the society. When the merchant provides you a smaller quantity of grain than you purchased for, you know extended swallow the insult. You communicate. When a gentleman in the marketplace addresses you darling in that dismissive tone, you don't blush and progress on. You maintain his vision until he wavers. It isn't rebellion precisely, but it is refusal. Refusing to vanish, even in the smallest moments. Back at the boarding house, you start sharing these stories over tea. The women laugh, applaud, lift each other up. Before long, others arrive. At the soup kitchen, Ms. Potter brings yesterday's rolls from a baker she's befriended. Edith gathers pennies in a jar on the parlour mantel. Miss Hanley shaking but determined, reads scripture aloud to those gathered, not to judge them, but to remind them they're witnessed together. You transform from shadows at society's margins. You become a form of quiet defiance, a chorus built from discarded voices. And yet, underneath the work, there's always the hovering dread. The poorhouse, the dormitory, the gradual descent from one who gives charity to one who needs it. It hovers above you like heavy fog, never entirely absent. You document it in your journal. It isn't starvation that scares me. It's disappearance, to be present and then absent, without anyone noticing, without documentation. So you continue writing. You record the names of the women at the kitchen. You outline their stories. You note their small victories, the widow's precise braids, the governess's recall of a poem, the girl's crimson scarf. You write it all because somebody should. One evening, Margaret's letter comes. She writes, "What you're doing matters more than they'll acknowledge." They label it charity. I call it strength. Continue. I am proud. You fold the paper carefully. You press it against your lips and you think, maybe for the first time, that this work, this witnessing, this stubborn persistence is its own kind of love story. Because to refuse to vanish, to insist that others not vanish with you, this too is devotion. And it is enough to sustain you through another long winter. The advertisement is tiny, squeezed between notices for steamship departures and patent medicines. You nearly overlook it, but then your eye finds the bold opportunities for industrious women. Passage to the colonies, respectable positions guaranteed. You read it repeatedly. Your tea grows cold on the table. It isn't the first time you've encountered such schemes. Ever since the census exposed that uncomfortable reality that Britain has far more women than men, pamphlets and societies have been busy proposing solutions. Export the excess. Some phrase it as though you were a shipment of fabric bolts, not people. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, they're constantly seeking wives. The empire, it appears, needs balance. Ships leave every season carrying hopeful faces and hastily packed trunks. Young women line the decks, half terrified, half exhilarated, bound for towns where men outnumber them 5-1. You picture it a fresh beginning, a place where your singleness isn't a defect but a resource. A land where you might be pursued again, not because of who you are, but because of who's absent. The thought is both intoxicating and degrading. At the boarding house you mention it over supper. Edith scoffs instantly. What? Exchange one kind of prison for another? I'd rather scrub floors here than be shipped like livestock to the colonies. She stabs her potato with emphasis. Ms. Potter, more contemplative, shrugs. At least there might be music there. Pianos, new churches, new audiences for a voice nobody listens to here. Her eyes flicker with something between yearning and defeat. Even Miss Hanley, typically reserved, admits she once considered it. A cousin of mine went, married a farmer in Ontario, wrote once or twice, said the winters nearly destroyed her, said the isolation was worse. She shakes her head slowly. No, I'll die here, where at least I know the names on the gravestones. Still, the idea stays with you. You lie awake that night imagining the ship, the salt wind on your face, the sound of ropes creaking, the horizon stretching wide like a second chance. You imagine stepping onto a foreign shore and no one knowing you as the spinster in the back pew or the aunt in the spare room. You'd just be another woman, another chance. But then the doubts arrive. Would you be valued or just endured until some farmer needed a wife to work his fields and raise his children? Would you discover freedom or simply another form of servitude with harsher winters and fewer options? The pamphlet makes it sound so effortless, but you know better. Life rarely delivers miracles in print. You close your eyes and picture Margaret's last letter instead. Her words, her ink, her certainty that your presence here matters, that your work, your voice, your persistence is needed not across oceans but right where you are. The choice is yours, naturally. For the first time it feels like it genuinely is. But for now, you fold the advertisement and tuck it into your journal. Not as a plan, not as a promise, just as a reminder that escape is available, that exile is appealing, and that even surplus women dismissed at home are still considered valuable somewhere, if only for all the wrong reasons. The pamphlet remains tucked between the pages of your journal, its edges softening with each reread. It isn't that you intend to go, it's that the notion of going has its own strange power, a folded ticket out of invisibility, a reminder that the story of your life isn't necessarily finished. But leaving would mean abandoning everything you've constructed, the boarding house, your friends, the causes that have given you voice. Would you really exchange all of that for a chance at being needed in some frontier town? Needed, yes, but perhaps only as someone's wife, someone's caretaker, someone's womb. One evening you share the thought with Margaret, careful to phrase it casually, as if you're simply curious. Her reply arrives a week later. The letter is longer than typical, and in it she writes, "I cannot tell you what to choose, but I know there are worse fates than spinsterhood. One of them is being bound to a man who sees you only as a solution to his problem. Do not mistake desperation for love. Do not let anyone else determine what your worth should be." You read her words slowly, letting them settle like warmth after frost. She doesn't forbid you from dreaming of ships and horizons. She only reminds you that you're not surplus, not disposable, not cargo to be shipped out with crates of wool and sacks of barley. And at the soup kitchen, you mention the emigration schemes in passing, and one of the women, a former governess now serving broth beside you, sighs. "My cousin went to Sydney, married within 6 months, but when she wrote back, she confessed she was lonelier than ever. Imagine being surrounded by people and still invisible." Her words echo in your mind for days. You begin to understand that the appeal of the colonies isn't really about marriage or opportunity. It's about erasure. A chance to start over by disappearing from the place where your singleness has been catalogued, whispered about, measured like a flaw. To leave behind the pitying glances, the constant question marks. But exile is exile, no matter how wide the sky. One night, as rain drums the roof of Ms. Tremaine's house, you open your journal and tape the pamphlet to a page. Underneath it, you write a reminder that I could go, but also that I can stay. Because perhaps the more radical choice is not escape, but persistence. To remain where society insists you don't belong, to carve space where none was offered, to take up oxygen without apology. At breakfast the next morning, Edith notices the spark in your eye and teases you for plotting something again. You laugh and don't deny it, because you are plotting something. Not a voyage to distant shores, but a deeper rooting in your own. The colonies can keep their promises of second chances. You intend to make yours right here, under grey skies, in drafty halls, with women whose voices rise alongside yours. You close the journal and smooth the ribbon tie. The pamphlet rustles faintly inside. Not temptation anymore, just a relic. Evidence that escape was available. But resistance, quiet, stubborn, local, is the choice you made. You find the pen again. Not for correspondence, not for polite replies or petition letters or carefully crafted notes passed hand to hand in meetings. This time it's for something different. You've always written quietly in the margins, in your journal, on the backs of sermon bulletins and old shopping lists. But now you begin something new, a story. Fiction, though not entirely, not truly. It starts with a woman who walks alone through a village that doesn't know what to do with her. You don't plan it. The words come quickly, then slower, then quickly again. You write in the evenings when the house has gone quiet and your hands are no longer needed for soup or sewing. A woman alone, yes, but not drifting. She is observant, fierce, funny. You borrow from women you know, from Miss Hanley's sideways glances, from Margaret's letters, from your own quiet defiance. You write not to be admired, but to be understood. At first you conceal it, fold the pages, keep them beneath your underthings in the bottom drawer. It feels self-indulgent, writing about yourself through someone else's eyes, giving shape and language to emotions that have always lived behind your ribs. But one rainy afternoon, Ms. Potter discovers you at the writing desk. You're always scribbling these days, she says with a crooked smile. Is it a novel? Or letters to a secret admirer? You laugh too quickly. When you don't answer, she doesn't push. She only says, if it's about us, make me taller. And with that, the spell breaks, the secret loosens. So you show her, and she reads it, and she weeps. I didn't know we were allowed, she whispers, dabbing her eyes. To be the story, not just the footnote. That night you rewrite your opening line. Not she was a woman left behind, but she was a woman the world miscalculated. You write more with fresh confidence. The story deepens. The spinster walks the village, yes, but she also argues at council meetings, laughs too loudly, discovers she loves the scent of beeswax and lilac. She remembers the way another woman once tucked a curl behind her ear and called her brave without irony. You send a chapter to Margaret. Her reply comes with underlined praise and one line that makes your throat tighten. You've written the life we never got to read. You begin to wonder, what if other women saw this? What if, buried in their kitchens or curled under staircases, they read a story and finally saw themselves? You find the address of a small periodical, the London Review for Ladies, and send a copy under a pen name. A month later, you receive a response. We found your submission striking, original, and necessary. We would be honoured to publish it. You sit in stunned silence for a long time. The world outside your window continues as usual. Milk carts, children bickering, a dog barking 2 streets over. But inside you, something shifts. You're no longer just surviving, you're speaking, and people are listening. The day your story's published, you hold the printed journal in both hands, like it might evaporate. The cover smells of fresh ink and thin paper, inexpensive but proud. You turn to the page slowly, savouring every crease, every column. And there it is. Your words, your voice, your woman printed for the world to see. You trace your pen name at the top of the page. A Finch. Not your real name, obviously, but a quiet nod to Miss Adelaide Finch, the first woman you ever watched live alone and unashamed. It feels right, a lineage of sorts, even if no one knows. You don't tell the others at first. You want a moment to sit with it alone, to read your own thoughts reflected back at you. Not as scribbled scraps, but as something real, something recognised. But secrets in the boarding house are like drafts. They slip through cracks. It's Ms. Hanley who discovers it first. She spots the journal on your desk, flips it open, and lets out a soft "Oh." You turn, startled, but she's already reading. You brace for questions. Instead, she smiles. That's you, isn't it? The spinster with the crooked umbrella and the too loud laugh. You nod. She reads silently for a moment longer, then says, make sure she gets a second chapter. The others figure it out quickly. At supper that evening, Edith raises a brow and says, you'd better sign my copy before I tell the grocer we've a celebrity under this roof. Laughter spills across the table, warm and teasing. You realise then they're not just proud. They feel seen, reflected, rewritten. In the weeks that follow, the boarding house becomes a little hive of creation. Ms. Potter starts composing songs again, melancholy things with hopeful endings. Edith sends an article to a reformist paper under the name EP in Bath. Even Ms. Tremaine, gruff and formal, donates a stack of old notebooks she discovers in the attic. In case you want to write more of us, she mutters. And you do. You write late into the night. Stories, essays, letters to the editor, pieces about education, about poverty, about the invisible labour of unmarried women who keep households, nurse relatives, support revolutions, all without acknowledgement. You become known gradually as that spinster writer with a bite in her pen. And still no one knows your real name. Not yet. And perhaps they never will. But your words travel farther than you ever imagined possible. One day a letter arrives from a girl in Glasgow, barely 18. She writes, "I read your story aloud to my mother. We both cried. She said, 'I didn't know anyone else felt like this. Thank you for writing us into the world.' You fold the letter carefully and slip it between the pages of your journal. It is not fame, it is not fortune, it is something rarer, it is validation. You were never meant to be a main character. You were never written into the script society handed down. But now, through ink and risk and stubborn courage, you've become the author of your own place in history. And in doing so, you've carved space for all the other women who thought they were forgotten. They never were. You see them now. You write them whole. It begins with a dispute in the church, not a dramatic one naturally. This is still England, but sharp enough that people begin whispering before the final hymn. It's about seating, of all things. The vicar, in his usual gentle arrogance, suggests that the front pews during Sunday services be reserved for young families and married couples to set an example of unity. You blink when you hear it, because surely he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But then he smiles, his sermon smile, the kind that says, "This is God's order." And suddenly every unmarried woman in the room feels her cheeks burn. Afterwards, Ms. Potter mutters, "So what are we? Clutter." You say nothing at first. You know how these things work. Stirring waters is improper. And what would you even say? That the phrase setting an example of unity effectively casts your entire existence into the category of disorder. But when you pass by the church notice board and see the new pew layout posted with pins, your silence shatters. You march home, you tear out a page from your writing folio, and you begin. To the vicar and church council. The letter is not angry, but it is precise. You write about dignity, about inclusion, about how many unmarried women support this church with their time, their coin, their labour. How many of you arrange the flowers, teach the children, manage the accounts, and never once complain when your names are left off public acknowledgements. You don't sign it alone. Every woman in the boarding house adds her name, then a few others from the reform circle, then the widowed seamstress down the lane who once stitched the altar cloth, then 2 women you've never even spoken to, retired nurses who heard about the letter from someone who heard it from someone. You deliver it in person. The vicar accepts it, with raised brows and thin lips. "Well," he says, "I hadn't realised this seating arrangement would be seen as a slight." You smile sweetly. "That's the problem, Reverend. You didn't realise at all." You walk home to polite chaos. The letter has become the talk of the town. Half the parish praises your courage. The other half calls it unbecoming. You're told that unmarried women shouldn't court controversy, that your voice is stronger when kept gentle, that unity means accepting some compromise. But you've compromised enough. That Sunday, you and the others arrive early. You sit right there in the second pew from the front, where the sunlight hits the hymnals. You sit with your back straight and your gloves perfectly buttoned. No one says a word, but everyone notices. After the service, a few married women stop you. They don't say much, just a touch on the arm, a nod. One murmurs, "It was good to see you up front. It felt right." You thank her. You don't cry, though you could have later. At home, Miss Hanley raises a teacup to the women in the second pew. She toasts. You all drink, and you realise it wasn't about seating. It was about space. Who is allowed to be seen, who is permitted to take up room, and who gets to decide. And this time you decided. The following week, something curious happens at the Sunday service. The front pews are full, not just with young families and the usual row of starched collars, but with a new formation. Spinsters, widows, school teachers, and a librarian who's never been seen without gloves. No one announces the change. No one dares comment aloud, but the order has shifted. You sit beside Miss Potter again, both of you humming the first hymn just a little louder. You feel it, the difference, the weight of eyes, some approving, some disapproving, some simply confused. Let them look. The vicar's sermon is noticeably bland. He avoids any mention of family or duty. Perhaps it's the letter, or perhaps he simply realised that half his most reliable congregants just reminded him they exist and can organise. When it's over, as the congregation spills into the courtyard, you overhear a young man say, "I didn't know old Miss Price could look so sharp in a hat." Miss Price pretends not to hear, but her posture has never been straighter. It's a small thing, but you know better than most. Small things accumulate. That evening, seated by the hearth at Miss Tremaine's, the conversation turns to death. Not in a morbid way, just practical. Someone asks, what happens when a woman like you passes on? Where do her things go? Who mourns? Who writes the obituary? You've wondered this yourself. Your name might be printed in the back of the paper. Miss Surname, long-time resident of Bath, remembered fondly by friends. No children to carry your features forward, no family plot with room left. Just a name, and only if someone remembers to spell it right. But now, looking around at these women, these fighters, readers, bakers, writers, you realise something. You will not vanish. You've been writing, you've been published, you've been seen. Even if it was under a pseudonym, it was your voice, your thoughts, your life stitched into sentences that someone, somewhere, folded into their own hands and understood. And you've remembered others too. You wrote down their names, their stories. The one who taught piano until her hands gave out. The one who cried over violets. The one who spoke of Vienna just once. They will not vanish either, because you wrote them down. And when you die, it won't be as a ghost. It will be as a woman who occupied her space, even when the world tried to compress her into a footnote. One of the younger women at the table speaks up. "We should decide now where we'd like to be buried," she says, "not leave it to someone who'll forget." Ms. Hanley nods solemnly. "And make sure we're all named properly. None of this unmarried business in italics." You laugh. Agreed. And so it's settled. There's talk of a shared plot, a stone that simply reads, "Here rest women who lived exactly as they pleased." Perhaps not quite true, but close enough to feel like rebellion. That night in your journal you write, "I have no child to carry my name, no husband to say he knew me best. But I have written, I have loved, I have stood in the front pew, I was here," and that, in the end, is your epitaph. You've developed a kind of armour, not the loud, obvious kind. No chainmail or declarations. Yours is quieter, a perfectly tied bonnet, a calm smile, a practised reply to each intrusive question. It's the way you carry yourself through markets and meetings, through sermons and supper tables, always just polite enough to disarm, just firm enough to deflect. Because after all these years, you know what people say when they think you're not listening. Poor dear, still alone. Such a shame. So clever too. She must be difficult, or unlucky, or both. They mean well. That's the most exhausting part. They mean well while dismantling you in teaspoons. And the thing is, you're not unkind. You understand that gossip is how people make sense of what they don't understand. A woman without a husband. A woman who doesn't seem desperate for one. A woman who teaches, writes, votes in reform meetings, wears sensible boots, and sometimes laughs too loudly at inappropriate jokes. There must be something wrong with her. Once that wounded you. The assumptions, the whispers, the invitations that stopped coming. You used to second-guess your every word, try to sound softer, smoother, smaller, but now you've grown tired of shrinking. You catch them staring sometimes. Those women with gloved hands and husbands at their sides, their lives seemingly secure in family portraits and Sunday roasts. You used to envy them. Now you recognise that some of them envy you, because while they traded their names and dreams for a hyphenated identity, Mrs. So-and-so, you've kept yours entirely. You've lived by your own rules. You've decided when to rise, when to write, when to serve, and when to say no. There's power in that, even if it comes with solitude. The gossip continues, of course. Always does. The latest version paints you as eccentric, that spinster writer with opinions. One woman claimed she saw you at the museum alone and found it unbearably sad, but you love the museum. You love walking through those halls without company, without compromise. You linger at the portraits others skip. You craft secret histories, murmuring them to yourself, imagining the people breathing inside those painted rectangles. You once invented a complete novel centered on a girl in a jade gown, a creature who only existed in the dark corner of a forgotten canvas. You lose hours in that space, yet not a moment of it feels solitary. The rest of the world sees you unaccompanied and assumes you must ache for something more. They figure your waking hours are heavy with regret, and your nights echo with vacant quiet. They are simply unable to grasp that this might be a conscious choice, that it could be superior to the life they offered. And yes, certain days are difficult. There are times you long for a warm presence next to you in the shadows, a sound from the adjoining room, a future that was not entirely self-conceived. But you would still prefer living with that wistfulness than settling for compromise. You would rather be misinterpreted than exploited. You would rather inspire pity than be subjected to control. And above all, you would sooner be labelled the eccentric spinster who composes letters and strolls in the downpour than the pathetic woman who surrendered everything and received nothing in return. Because you have given much, but you have also safeguarded a core part of yourself. And that, conceivably, is your ultimate act of defiance. It is a Tuesday afternoon when you first catch their murmuring. Two younger women, scarcely past 20, lingering near the town's newspaper stand. You are only a few steps away, glancing through a worn paperback, when the words pierce the air. "That's her, isn't it? The one who never married. Writes those peculiar tales, always by herself." There is no hostility in their tone, merely simple curiosity. But the phrase lingers, fragile and faintly condescending. You feign indifference. That is the armour you wear again, buffed, courteous, undisturbed. But later that night, while trimming a candle's wick in your chamber, the words return, always by herself. And the honest truth is, you are not constantly alone. Merely often. Often enough that people confuse it for your natural state, your definitive character. But you have never been truly isolated. You have enjoyed friends, lovers, companions, conversations so riotous with joy, they left your side sore. You have had nights devoted to correspondence and mornings infused with purpose. You have recognized love not as a singular lightning strike, but as 100 gentle rains that nourished you gradually, over the passage of time. The notion that your life is solely defined by absence feels ridiculous, yet you understand their reasoning. You did not marry. You did not raise children. You are beholden to no one. In the judgment of many, this renders you a phantom. You possess flesh and breath, certainly, but you are somehow detached from the established order of things. So you proceed to forge your own structure. You arrange your days with meticulous attention, not just out of necessity, but as a ritual. You allocate 60 minutes for writing, an hour for reading, an hour for walking, even when your ankles protest and the atmosphere hints at a coming shower. You prepare unpretentious meals and consume them using your preferred china. You purchase blossoms for your writing desk, not to impress a guest, but because beauty has always felt like a profound form of sustenance. And you engage with people. You check in on Edith. You deliver Miss Potter snippets for her memory book. You sit with new tenants, inquiring about their travels, their disappointments, their aspirations. You gradually become a reliable presence, no longer the subject of idle gossip, but the one they depend on. The individual who recalls anniversaries, who carries extra handkerchiefs, who understands which herbal infusion soothes frayed nerves and which volume to loan to a woman grieving a loss she refuses to name. One afternoon, a young boy at the soup kitchen asks if you are someone's grandmother. No, you reply, smiling, but I belong to a great many people. And it is accurate. You do not belong to a husband or a domestic unit or a name shared by legal decree. But you belong to fleeting moments, to connections, to rooms that seem to settle when you enter, to lives you have touched in quiet, unheralded ways. And as you sit by your window that evening, firelight dancing on the pages of your journal, a realization dawns. They can whisper, always by herself, as much as they like. It will never be accurate, because you are enveloped not by a single person, but by a collective of many. Not by a formal designation, but by chronicles. Not by lineage, but by meaning. You are not determined by what is absent. You are made clear by what you bear within, and what you bear, benevolence, lucidity, fortitude, is more than most people ever manage to possess. You are midway through a cookie at the Reformed Circle meeting when the discussion turns to women's physical complaints. Predictably, it commences with someone mentioning nerves, then meanders outward from there. Indigestion, wakefulness, hysterics, deep sadness. Miss Blatchley, ever keen on providing a remedy, announces, "It's our modern way of life, naturally. Too much intellectual exertion. Too many unmarried ladies left to ferment in their own thoughts. What they require is ocean breezes and a potent restorative." You nearly choke on your tea because you have encountered this tired old pronouncement hundreds of times before. Probably more. In the judgment of polite society, an unattached woman past 40 is either saintly in her self-sacrifice, oddly peculiar, or chronically ailing. Sometimes all three. They diagnose you, not with a medical device, but with a swift appraisal, and the remedy is invariably the same, to correct her silence, her melancholy, her posture. You recall the first time a physician informed you that your inability to sleep was inherently female. He prescribed an opium tincture and fresh flowers in your apartment. You were 19. Since then, the recommendations have included valerian essence, fish oil, rose distillate, compresses, potassium bromide, and, memorably, a tiny phial of electric powder for lady excitability. You never uncorked that particular one, keeping it on your mantelpiece as an oddity. Once, a relative insisted you attend a water cure retreat. They swaddled you in icy cloths, served you meat broth and declared you cured. When you ceased weeping on the third day, you were not healed. You were simply spent. You begin to contemplate whether anyone has ever composed an accurate study on the Victorian compulsion to fix women who were perfectly intact. The truth is, your constitution is sound. What they categorize as deep sadness is often nothing more than a reasonable reaction to a society that permits so little genuine space for women like you to live fully. You do not require a tonic. You need self-governance. You need honesty. But no bottle is labelled for that. At the boarding house, the subject becomes an ongoing jest. Ms. Hanley asserts that camphor oil cured her of the need for validation. Edith relies on scorched orange peels and dry wit. You draft a satirical advertisement and affix it to the announcement board. Miss A. Finch's elixir for unmarried womanhood, guaranteed to solidify conviction, reinforce resolve, sharpen clarity of purpose, and induce minor irritation in small-minded gentlemen. It swiftly becomes a house favourite. Yet beneath the amusement is a deeper, quieter distress. Because you have known women who were medicated into submission, given tranquilizers instead of support, shock therapy instead of compassion, encouraged to go numb rather than speak out, and too often these women vanished into mental institutions, into profound silence, into rooms where no one came calling after official visiting hours. It sends a chill through you even now, because you were perilously close once, not to losing your mind, but to yielding, to accepting. The narratives told about you, that your sorrow was a flaw, that your solitude was self-inflicted, that your hunger for a richer existence was a type of ailment. But you did not yield. You interrogated, you composed, you reached out. And in doing so, you discovered that what they labelled deep sadness was in reality mourning, for the life you were pressured to desire but did not, for the love you nearly grasped but were forbidden to articulate, for the person you had to conceal behind layers of lace, letters, and delicate teacups. You no longer mourn, not in that manner. You rage sometimes, but mostly you construct narratives, relationships, resistance. Because you are not a diagnosis, you are not an ailment to be managed. You are not, and never were, someone who required repair. The essential truth about Victorian medical nonsense is its ubiquity. You begin to recognise it not only in vials and pamphlets, but in polite discourse, in sermons, in gift baskets, in every suggestion that a woman's discomfort must originate internally, never externally, that it is her temperament, not her circumstances, that needs correcting. You visit a book dealer one afternoon and find a shelf entirely devoted to feminine wellness. Titles such as On the Fragile Constitution of the Unwed, Home Remedies for Spinsters, and one particularly ridiculous volume, The Restorative Powers of Clean Floors and Quiet Habits. You laugh loudly. The bookseller scowls. Later you read a passage aloud at dinner. A woman unmarried past her 30th year must redirect her creative passions into needlework and moral instruction, lest she succumb to spiritual collapse. Edith snorts. So that's the secret to why my embroidery is all that prevents me from descending into perdition. Miss Potter claps her hands. Then, I must be on the brink, barely clinging to salvation. Everyone is laughing, but beneath the laughter is a feeling more intense. Weariness, mutual recognition. The awareness that you have spent a lifetime being analysed without ever being consulted. You reflect on the women who did falter, who were confined to asylums for wanting too much, or weeping too often, or speaking the wrong name aloud during the night. Women whose relatives rationalised their absence with phrases like nervous troubles or flights of fancy. And you wonder if you had screamed just once, would they have sent you away too? Probably not. You are too composed, too methodical, too cautious. That is how you survived. But survival and true wellness are not the same thing. You have merely mastered the art of concealing your wounds effectively. You navigate the city differently now, past advertisements for sedatives, past posters for feminine calming herbs, past pharmacies with windows filled with pledges to soften the unsoftenable woman. You begin to write about it, an analytical essay this time. The medicalization of loneliness, what the tonic could never cure. It becomes longer than you anticipated. Pages of observations, memories, and righteous anger. You submit it to the London Review for Ladies using your pseudonym. A month later, it appears in print. The letters begin to arrive following that, dozens of them, from women in Norwich, Manchester, Edinburgh, from instructors, seamstresses, clerks, from wives too, and even one cloistered sister. I believed I was going mad. I believed I was flawed. I thought I was the only one who resented the doctor, who claimed I needed smelling salts instead of genuine conversation. You sit at your desk, overwhelmed by the response, and then you do something you have not done in many years. You draft a reply to every single letter. You share with them what no one shared with you. You are not too much. You are not defective. You are not a problem to be suppressed. And when you exhaust your supply of postage, the others contribute. Ms. Hanley seals the envelopes. Edith organises them by postal district. Miss Potter maintains a running count. The boarding house transforms into a centre of quiet rebellion, fuelled by biscuits, ink, and decades of silent sorrow. One afternoon, you sit in your room, holding the final letter of the day. A woman from Dorset writes, "Your words helped me recall who I was before they called me unwell." You close your eyes, because that is the true purpose of it all, is it not? Not simply to survive the narratives they fabricated about you, but to rewrite them with ink, with shared laughter, with your own two hands. You set your pen down, exhale deeply, and feel something you haven't experienced in years. Not relief, not victory, just stillness. It starts with a coldness in your bones that tea won't cure. You assume it's the climate at first, moisture in the wooden floors, the typical pain in your limbs. Nothing strange for women of your years and circumstance, but then it settles, stays and grows, and suddenly your body, once dismissed by the world, starts demanding your focus. The contradiction isn't missed by you. You've lived through decades, being informed that your body held no importance, that without the symbol of matrimony, without the purpose of bearing children, it was ordinary, neither praised nor grieved, just present, unspoken, undisturbed now. It reveals new realities. You start to perspire. In quiet spaces you wake with a pounding heart and no recollection of a vision. The mass you hold moves in unexpected areas. Your stomach, your legs, your throat. Your hairline grows faint. Your skin seems altered, and then one sunrise, your monthly cycle, just ends. You perch on the side of your mattress, looking at the fabric in your palms, and sense something between comfort and sorrow. The last door shuts. Not thrown, not secured, just shut. You anticipated it was approaching, but it still resembles a minor passing. In worship. The scriptures still mention abundance, of women as branches, of fertility opening and populations emerging. You listen to the comparisons and grin knowingly. A survivor of a conflict no one witnessed you enduring. You were once assumed to become a container. Then once you hadn't, assumed to become unseen. Now you're both. Now you are what persists. And what persists, as it happens, is not vacancy. It's vision. No more inquiries, no more possibilities murmured in the darkness. No more considering perhaps eventually. Your existence has reached its concluding chapter, not in deterioration, but in certainty. Ms. Hanley names it the cooling. She chuckles when she mentions it, waving herself in the middle of January. They inform you it'll be a gentle shift, but nobody discusses the heat in your bones, or how precise your recollection grows, or how you cease accepting nonsense. You understand she's correct. You do cease accepting nonsense. You communicate more directly now. You cease expressing regret for your views. You decline tea gatherings that tire you. You cease justifying your decisions to outsiders. You purchase money on supportive footwear and genuine butter and costly ink. You move more deliberately and absorb more thoroughly. And for the first instance, you inhabit your body, not as something assessed, but as something deserved. You start composing about growing older, not in the manner men do, victorious, filled with comparisons, about fall, gatherings, and golden periods. But truthfully, you compose about what it resembles to perspire through a talk, to sense fury surface without notice, to hurt in locations you didn't realize had labels. You compose about entering a space and losing track of purpose, about losing track of identities, about recalling the incorrect things at the incorrect moment. But you also compose about the liberation, the removal of the corset. Not just material, but assumption, the satisfaction of not being observed, the strength of ultimately being abandoned and selecting who to welcome in. Other women respond back. They name it the Great Silence. They express, I assumed I was the sole one who disliked the comparisons. They express appreciation for making this seem like a commencement instead of a conclusion. You grin because it is not an finish, not a descent, a return to yourself. You begin emerging earlier, not because you need to, but because you're able to. There's a tranquility to the sunrise now that you never observed before. Not the pressure of your earlier years or the rigid scheduling of your middle life patterns. Just breathing, illumination time. You no longer hurry to serve tea before anyone rises. You no longer practice your views before voicing them aloud. And when someone younger addresses you dear, you fix them. Not roughly, just steadily. You state, not dear, just me. And they flinch, uncertain how to answer. That satisfies you. Your image transforms too. You used to examine the mirror in dim illumination, turning somewhat to capture a more attractive perspective. Now you gaze straight on lines etched by amusement, eyes mellowed by experience. Your lips, once compressed into courtesy, now settled into something more knowledgeable, less decorative, more yours. Margaret appears more frequently now. Her hair has turned completely silver. Her palms hurt when it's frigid, but her eyes, still sharp, still luminous. You stroll together along the waterside, covered in wool wraps, trading thoughts, citing paragraphs back to each other from recall. You no longer converse in comparisons. You express what you intend. Sometimes she states one sunrise, observing swans drift past. I believe the only thing maintaining the world reasonable is a handful of keen women who no longer care about acceptance, you chuckle. We should place that on a banner. And maybe you should. You've outlasted the classifications. Spinster, old maid, reliant, leftover. They no longer attach. You've substituted them with fresh ones of your own selection. Writer, reformer, observer, designer of small universes. You have constructed an existence without ritual or announcements. One correspondence, one sheet, one deed of silent defiance at instance. And now, with each advancing year, it seems less like a settlement and more like a creation piece you've carved slowly with the blunt blade they abandoned you. You consider your companions, some still present, some departed, Miss Potter singing as she arranges her volumes in rainbow sequence, Miss Hanley covered in 3 wraps in the centre of August, announcing her newest theory about God being a woman with a terrible disposition. Edith still imagining of purchasing a bicycle, even if her knees won't exactly permit it. These women were not secondary figures. They were not postponements in someone else's narrative. They were the narrative. And so were you. One dusk, you arrive from the marketplace to discover a girl, hardly 20, lingering on the boarding house stairs. She's holding a pamphlet with your alias on it. She inquires if it's genuinely you. You gesture and she doesn't express much, just extends out a creased piece of paper and murmurs, "I believe I might be one of you." You unfold it afterward. It's a verse, uncertain, timid, but authentic, and you respond back. You don't need to transform into someone different to count. You already do. Welcome. You recognize in that instant that growing older is not a termination, it's a transmission on, not of weights, but of power. The world never provided you a guide map, but you traverse the landscape anyway, and now the following woman will locate your traces and understand she isn't misplaced. She'll understand she's reached. There's a distinctive dignity in being disregarded. At first, it hurts when you're younger and still desiring a look, an acknowledgement, a palm remaining too long on a glove you released. But then, as the years advance, it transforms into something different, a type of liberty. You navigate through avenues unobserved but unencumbered. You occupy in spaces where no one anticipates you to impress. So you absorb instead, attentively, more attentively than they'd prefer if they realized. And you start to observe the invisible mechanism behind everything. You witness how the shop girls stiffen when the supervisor passes by. You witness how the spouses struggle with their expressions when discussing of finances, frightened to confess they don't control any. You witness the looks traded between 2 women at a marketplace booth, sparking, intense, never vocalized aloud. They all assume no one is observing, but you are. You transform into a type of silent recorder of movements, confidences, undertones. You listen to what isn't stated. You retain details others discard. The manner Mrs. Ashby always purchases 2 lemons but acts it's for her husband's beverage. Though you once witnessed her, consume lemon water with a yearning grin and murmur the identity, Marie. The world is abundant of little quiets that only other quiet individuals identify. And because no one anticipates much from you, you start accomplishing everything you participate lectures you were never asked to, you dispatch anonymous correspondences to publishers, you establish a lending collection of prohibited volumes in the rear of the boarding house's washing space. You guide girls who appear trembling on the entrance with nowhere else to travel. No one challenges them. After all, you're just Miss Finch. Inoffensive, ordinary, a spinster. You display that expression now like protection. It admits you into locations no one else ventures to travel. Once, at a gentleman's organisation lecture on virtue, you occupy in the rear and inquire what fraction of moral deterioration might be credited to men wedding women they scarcely honour. The space turns frozen. One man releases his monocle. You never receive invited again, but 3 women deliver you appreciation notes on their departure out. It's an exchange you're content to complete. This is the authority of your obscurity. You're not observed, so you observe. You're not anticipated to direct, so you impact. You're not asked, so you establish your own spaces. And in accomplishing so, you gradually alter things silently, like water reforming a stone. There's a young servant named Lillian who begins reading your pamphlets. One night you locate her weeping in the stairwell. She's frightened her concepts are too unusual, too daring, that her wish to stay unmarried renders her abnormal. You occupy beside her, and there's nothing abnormal about being adequate for yourself. She doesn't accept you at first, but over duration she starts to display that concept like a second covering. She begins voicing up. She begins remaining in spaces a little extended. She begins resisting back when they address her girl instead of miss. This too is your labour. The obscure woman reforming the apparent universe. You never intended to direct anything. That was the appeal of it, genuinely. No movement, no group, no grand address beneath a gaslight fixture. Just the constant gathering of selections. Voice when you could have remained silent. Stay when you could have departed away. Compose when you could have consumed the expressions. But somehow these silent choices transform into force. The boarding house, once just a sanctuary for the disregarded, starts to hum with something different, something broader. Women reach with narratives, not just sorrows. An instructor dismissed for diverting the girls with concepts. A widow declining to remarry. A printer's apprentice who signs her identity without embarrassment. You observe the transformation in how they occupy, how they absorb, how they chuckle with their whole throats, not just behind covered palms. There's a brightness, but also an intention, a concealed current pulling you all in the identical path. You name it, the parlour movement. Not out loud, naturally, just among yourselves. A jest. At first the uprising shall be decorated in floral thread, but soon it transforms into something genuine. Genuine enough that you maintain a record of who's vocalised, what narratives were distributed, what volumes were transported in. You start recording everything, not for release, for conservation. Because you understand what history accomplishes to women like you. It dismisses them, revises them, diminishes them to side observations. So you transform into your own chronicler. Every Thursday the parlour occupies with voices, some fractured with years, others shaking with youth. You circulate around tea, sometimes sherry, and absorb as women recite aloud, correspondences never dispatched, concepts never vocalised, aspirations never permitted to inhale. And in this small space, history starts to recall you, not as observations, not as casualties, but as designers of your own damn story. One dusk, Edith recites a section about moral cleanliness from a pamphlet intended to embarrass unwed women. She ignites it in the fireplace following and states, "Well, I sense purer already." The space roars with amusement. This is how the labour is accomplished, not just through fury, but through intelligence, through the refusal to be reduced, through the constant collective deed of opposing naming yourselves not as civilization has classified you, but as you genuinely are. One of the younger women, Nora, starts gathering the composed fragments into a handmade volume. She stitches the binding herself on the covering. She decorates a heading in uneven thread, the unclaimed declarations of the free and female. You shed tears when you witness it, not out of sadness, but because for once something you've assisted establish seems undeniably genuine. Not a concept, not a murmur, an object you can grasp. You recognize in that instant that inheritance isn't always a structure. Sometimes it's a shelf abundant of dismissed correspondences, a silent gathering beneath a wavering lamp, a girl who no longer expresses regret when she penetrates a space. And you consider, if history won't create area for you, construct a space of your own. You already have. It occurs silently, as these things frequently do. You're in the garden one afternoon, knees in the moist soil, encouraging beans up the lattice, when Edith summons to you from the parlour glass. You've received a correspondence, she states, displaying it like a flag, and significant-looking one. You cleanse your palms on your covering and ascend the stairs, anticipating another solicitation for an article, or maybe a appreciation from one of the young women you'd counselled. Instead, it's from a woman named Miss Beale. You don't recognise her, but her letterhead displays the emblem of Girton College, one of the initial women's colleges in Cambridge. You scowl, fascinated, wary. She composes, "Your articles have generated quite a commotion among our pupils. We would be privileged if you'd contemplate appearing to address. Nothing structured, just a small assembly. Your expressions have assisted many of us since witnessed. You occupy with the correspondence for an extended duration. You've existed most of your existence behind the covering of namelessness. Your labour has always vocalised louder than your identity. You never anticipated invitations, and certainly not from the very chambers that once barred women entirely. But something inside you alters. A spark of interest. An inquiry. What if I stated yes? You dispatch your answer. 3 weeks afterward you mount a train to Cambridge. You display your finest boots and the dark green garment with the velvet fasteners. Margaret demands on placing a biscuit container into your sack in case the college nourishment lacks spirit. Miss Potter touches your cheek like a proud relative, and Edith states, "Don't you venture be modest. You've deserved this." The voyage is smooth. You observe, out the glass at the countryside, recalling a much younger version of yourself, looking at similar slopes, questioning if there'd ever be more to existence than murmured assessments and vacant afternoons. You reach just before sunset. Girton is attractive. Curved glasses, ivy-covered structures, wide courtyards abundant of conversing pupils in extended coats and ribboned caps. A young woman welcomes you at the terminal, gasping and wide-gazed. "Miss Finch," she inquires, as if incapable to accept you're genuine. You gesture, grinning softly. "Yes, I'm concerned I'm very genuine, boots and all." She chuckles, and you stroll together to the chamber. That dusk, you occupy in a drawing space occupied with women. Dozens. Pupils, instructors, young spinsters, widows, reformers, notebooks in their laps, gazes abundant of anticipation and understanding you weren't certain what you'd state. But as you start vocalizing, the expressions come smoothly. Decades of quietness untangled at last. You vocalize of isolation as both confinement and instructor. You vocalize of obscurity as a covering that transforms into a barrier. You vocalize of constructing community not through volume but through observation, by witnessing each other completely. They absorb, every one of them, not with the courteous detachment of gentleman audiences, but with appetite, with intensity. When you conclude, the space is quiet. Then someone applauds. Then another. And then the whole space erupts. Not in applause for a display, but in identification. They have listened to themselves in you, and in that instant you comprehend something fresh. Your existence was never minor. It was just silent, and now ultimately listened. They inquire questions, naturally, enthusiastic, tangled ones. Do you ever regret it? Did you select this existence, or did it select you? How did you recognize your voice counted? You respond truthfully without acting to have it all arranged. I didn't recognize, not at first. I only recognized that quietness was inferior. You state there were days I desired for something easier, but desiring and regret are not the identical. And then you state, the world may not have constructed a route for women like us, but we traversed anyway. That's the inheritance. Following, they encircle you not with reverence, but with identification. Some desire to clasp your palm. Some just desire to position near one compresses a creased note into your palm and murmurs, appreciation for making me sense like I'm not damaged. You don't shed tears, but the sensation is near. Not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just fulfillment. You arrive to the boarding house the following dusk. Margaret has prepared a pie. Edith's received the kettle on. Miss Hanley's sleeping in her seat, with a volume on her chest titled Men and Other Errors. Nothing has transformed, and everything has. You occupy in your space and observe how altered it seems now. Same structures, same noisy glass, but the world outside has altered a little, just adequate. You've contributed your voice to the harmony. You've transformed into part of the strand women will pursue long after you're departed. You start composing again, this instance with less doubt. You revise your older articles, not to soften them, but to explain. You incorporate the identities of women you once shielded in namelessness. Now they desire to be recognized. Now they request to be tallied. Your pamphlets start circulating again, this instance under your genuine identity, not as Miss Finch of Rosewood Boarding House, just you. One sunrise, you obtain a small package. Brown paper, cord, no return location. Inside is a volume bound in blue fabric, gold decorated on the covering surplus. No compositions from the unclaimed. It's a released version of Nora's Handmaid Gathering. Someone, many someones, must have assembled together to produce it. On the heading sheet, there's a for the woman who instructed us that being unclaimed is not a curse, but a summons. You trace the expressions with your finger. Afterward that week, a girl you've never witnessed knocks on the boarding house entrance. She's grasping the volume near to her chest. She inquires if there's still area for one more. You grin. There's always area. She pursues you down the passage where the others are already assembled. Tea is steeping, correspondences are being creased, concepts are being born, and you consider not with satisfaction but with stillness. The world desired me minor. I provided it something silent instead, and that silent resonated. You never possessed a structure, no bronze figure, no marble tablet, no sentence in a schoolbook with your identity emphasized. But then again, you never genuinely required one, because every woman who arrived through your entrance transported something forward, not just your expressions but your manner of existing. Your insistence on softness with a backbone, on quietness as an instrument, not a confinement, on dignity that didn't demand a husband identity to validate it. The boarding house, once just protection, has transformed into a type of repository, not of relics, but of opportunities. The parlour structures are bordered with volumes now, some composed by you, some by women you guided, some by those who once concealed verses in coat containers, or scrawled verses on paper ripped from grocery listings. Even the washing space has narratives now. You sometimes traverse the chambers at night, palm-brushing the old wallpaper, recalling the giggles from Space 7 when Edith attempted on trousers for the initial instance, the thud from upstairs when Ms. Hanley's makeshift producing press jammed and detonated, ink all over the ceiling, the keen slap of cards on the surface when the women discovered poker and transformed ruthlessly competitive. You recall the silent too, the correspondences ignited, the expressions unstated, the sorrow that remains even in liberty. You transport those too, not as weights, but as proof, because liberation, you've discovered, is never orderly. It arrives with chaos and grieving and missed opportunities, and still you selected it. They once addressed women like you surplus, as if your worth were determined by a record of marriages and births, as if the deficiency of a ring signified the deficiency of an existence. But you've composed another type of calculation. You've determined worth in correspondences dispatched, in companionships created over tea and firelight. In the instant a girl recites your expressions and occupies a little straighter in every single woman who murmurs to herself, "I'm permitted to exist like this." You're older now, your limbs creak, your handwriting trembles, but your mind, your mind is keener than ever. Sometimes you recline awake in the early sunrise, absorbing to the city altar outside your glass, and you consider how many of us are out there now. How many women have stepped off the anticipated route and located a gentler one beneath the branches? How many decline to express regret for the area they occupy up? You used to dread being dismissed, but now you comprehend that recollection isn't always an identity carved in stone. Sometimes it's a phrase transmitted between companions, a section emphasised in a collection volume, a concealed gathering in a parlour that still smells faintly of lavender and ink. Your inheritance is not what you abandon behind, it's what you establish in motion. One afternoon in late spring, you occupy by the glass with a wrap over your knees and a notebook in your lap. Outside, the garden hums. Bees drift between the foxglove and the lavender. The younger women are suspending up bunting for some small festivity. No one requires a reason anymore. Celebrating just existing is adequate. You listen to the creak of the barrier and the rustle of fresh footwear. Another girl reaching. She's holding a satchel to her chest like it holds the moon. You don't hurry to welcome her. Someone different will. That's the appeal now. It no longer relies on you alone. You've transformed into the root network, deep and invisible, but always present. In your notebook you scribble a sentence you once recited and never dismissed. We are the daughters of all the women who could not vocalise, and now you contribute, and we are the mothers of all those who will not inquire permission. It strikes you then how distant things have arrived. When you initially reached here decades ago, the wallpaper paper stripped, the teapot dripped, and no one exactly recognised if survival could be attractive. You didn't recognise if you were constructing anything enduring or just patching openings in a sinking vessel. But this house, this existence, has transformed into more than patchwork. It's transformed into a narrative, an uprising stitched in lace. A sisterhood constructed not on blood but on conviction. And now you sense the slow settling of stillness. Not a finish, just a gentle palm resting on your shoulder, stating you've accomplished adequate for today. Someone knocks softly and transports you tea spiced with cinnamon and orange peel, just the manner you prefer it. You consume slowly. The sun heats your face. No medals, no announcements, but a whole world silently reformed by women who are never supposed to count. And you consider, just before you sleep off, let the world address us surplus. We'll address ourselves sovereign. The space is silent now. The fire has diminished to embers, casting a gentle orange radiance that sparkles across the floorboards. Outside, the world rotates slowly, unaware, maybe, of the existences that flourished silently in its dismissed corners. You're not alone in this quietness. Across duration, across cities and villages and lamplit parlours, there are women, many, many women who once occupied just like you, with ink-stained fingers and stubborn hearts constructing something out of nothing. They may not distribute your identity, but they distribute your rhythm, your bravery, your refusal to disappear. Tonight you rest understanding that what you existed counted not in loud history, volume manners, but in correspondences transmitted palm to palm, in girls who discover to recite without embarrassment, in the simple deed of remaining when remaining was the radical thing to accomplish. so shut your gazes. Imagine the lace curtains swaying in the summer wind. Imagine the teacups rattling softly on their saucers as amusement emerges from the following space. Imagine the lilac flourishing again in the garden, stubborn and gentle all at once. Let the world outside soften into fog. You've traversed an extended road through silent uprisings and concealed power. Now it's instance to place it all down, just for a while. Inhale deep. You're protected. You are recalled. You are not surplus. You are the narrative.